We all know why we're here, and that's to remember somebody who's very special to all of us. It was impossible to know Ruth and not to love her. Everybody I've ever seen meet her instantly connected with her. Whether it was her family who had known her for their whole lives, or whether it was just me and Sam's friends who'd come over to the house. People just always connected with her. She had such a way of listening and such a way of making you feel noticed and heard and cared about.
Okay, so my sister Allie couldn't make it, so she was really upset. So she sent us siblings a passage that reminded her of Aunt Ruth. She said it's one of her favorites, and it was from the passage of Ruth. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. 1:16. She also put Aunt Ruth was like a huge influence in our life. You know, she held all of us together, made sure, you know, we were important, we were fed, we were taught all of the nice Wilkie foods like dumplings and candies. And so, you know, just to have her gone is really hard for all of us because she was what held us all together.
So this is from one of Angie's books, and it says, "Please, Davis, I'm leaving for 2 days. Are you sure?" Kipling said, with his hands trembling where we're touching, whether real or feigned. I couldn't tell. Kip's not above using theatrics to push his agenda, but in this case, I was pretty sure the trembling was real, because mine was. His brown eyes looked in through his long, unruly bangs. I remember thinking, as I held myself still, that he looked like Fawn, all cuteness and innocence, begging me to give him and to give in to us. By the time he said those words, there wasn't much resistance left in him to overcome. I wanted him desperately with my whole body's hunger, that was both sweetly tender and viciously primal in its depth and intensity. I'd resisted until the resistance was futile. Not only futile, but laughable. My heart has been his since the first moment I saw him, and his sweet cinnamon scent filled my nose. I knew the price I'd pay for giving in, even though Kipling never believed me when I told him the pack would probably beat me if they found out that I'd gone against the Alpha's direct orders. And the Beta's not just orders, but direct threat to hurt me if I disobeyed the tiniest of his disinterested and ridiculous rules. Kipling never truly understood anything when it came to me, and more accurately, me and him. Not because he was stupid and didn't know about pack dynamics. He was, and I'm sure still is, a brilliant magus, well versed in all things magical, including behavior of all shifters. He just conveniently didn't see obstacles when they stood in the way of something he wanted. And he wanted me, who cared if I was the lowest belly-crawling dog in the pack, who cared that I'd been forbidden when to take a mate and when to be part of the pack by the leaders of the pack, who cared if my place in the pack was turning a step back. Only my aunt's continued protection kept me from being shown the door. None of that mattered to Kip because he wanted me, and so in his mind the universe would simply bend to his will, and just, it always did when he set his mind to a goal.
At this time I'm going to read the obituary for Ruth. Ruth Agnes Light, Wilkie, age 78, of Bolingbrook, previous longtime resident of Aurora, left this life November 19th, 2021. Waiting for her as she crossed over were her loving parents, Otto and Eldora Wilkie, brothers John and James Wilkie, sister-in-law Gwen Mitchell. Ruth leaves behind her cherished siblings at the time, Carol, brother-in-law Jim Moak, Robert Wilkie, Richard and Angie Wilkie, Dodie and Ron Lynch, and sister-in-law Sheila Wilkie. Also left behind in Ruth's absence are her nieces and nephews, Lori Conroy, Beth Taylor, Bryce Wilkie, Drew Wilkie, Amy Peters, Adam Wilkie, Amanda Colden, Anna Williamson, Amber Garley, Allison Sandalva, Jeremy Lynch, Sam Lynch, and Ruth Anna Lynch. Ruth's journey in life was one of great adventure and kindness. After graduating from Oswego High School, she went on to graduate from Silver Cross Nursing Program. As a new nurse, she worked at Mercy Hospital in Aurora. Ruth eventually went to Germany, where she stayed for approximately 3 years, working at a United States Army hospital. Upon her return to the United States, she returned to Aurora to live and finished her nursing career in Central DuPage Hospital. Throughout her life, Ruth enjoyed traveling, visiting friends, gardening, and making pictures and cards from flowers she dried and pressed. She passed many afternoons playing Chinese checkers with anyone brave enough to challenge her. Ruth's love for others was full circle as those who knew her returned the love that she gave. She was kind in spirit, possessed quick, dry wit that is sorely missed, but lives on in the fondness of memories. Ruth's life will be celebrated in private service, which we are doing today, with family at a later date. Everyone here obviously loved Ruth very much. The effect that she had on people was one that made everyone willing to come to her at any time. I can't think of a single person in our entire family who's received more visits from family members over the years. She was kind of like the glue that held us together.
I was looking through some of her stuff. I found this empty notebook. And I'm flipping through it. And on the back page, she has vacation. She started a list. June 2027. Who knows? Through 20. And the only two things she wrote on this list was Chinese checkerboard and marbles and flower press.
What more do you need?
She often told me a story, or I think I got it from Ruth. It could have been Aggie passed down. But anyway, I don't know if you're familiar with what I call a mother-in-law's tongue. It's that really long stalk of a plant.
Snake plant.
She told me that when my grandmother passed, it bloomed. They bloom so seldom, so rarely, most people don't even know they do bloom. She had this rose bush out in front of the house she rented. We all know she loved her flowers. But the lawnscape people had sprayed on a rainy day and sprayed the bush, and it got poison on it. And it didn't bloom that well that year. But the next year it bloomed really good. And we had all kinds of cuttings. I mean, they're still these little tiny rose. This year, it died. It did not. This spring. So I thought she would have thought that was very poetic, the memory.
I'm a nurse too, so we would always talk about nursing, and I love how Ruth was always so humble about everything. Like she was so artistic, and we'd all be like, "We love your flower presses," and she'd be like, "Oh, it's just what I do when I feel like it." Or her pottery, I'm like, "Oh, I love this cup. I love all the things." I'm like, "Oh, I really like this." She'd be like, it's whatever. I made this on whatever. So all the things that we talk about nursing, she'd be like, "Oh, I was a terrible nurse. I did this," and I'm like, "No, you sound like you were a great nurse. Like, what are you talking about?" So I just wanted to say I love how humble and giving, and she always did everything so wonderfully, but always was like, man, it's fine. It's whatever, all the time. And she sent me her nursing hats, and when I told my coworkers I was coming to this funeral, they were like, "Oh, you can wear the hat when you come back." So I'm going to wear her hat that she got when she graduated nursing school to work when I get back to work. Because I want to.
Yeah. I just loved talking to her about her, adventures she'd had. And she had so many. And, my favorite ones to, get her talking about, even if I heard the story 3,000 times, I'd be like, "Tell me about Germany." And the way her eyes would sparkle, and, her smile would slowly spread across her face as she thought back. And it was really funny because, I had this friend, because I lived in Germany, and Ruth for a little bit, who would come by and was she didn't know Ruth, so she was a little intimidated by her. I'm like, no. Ruth is one of the nicest people you could possibly meet. And I would always advise her, just ask her about Germany. It's one of her favorite things to talk about. And the pictures, the memories, and I feel like Ruth could have written a book too, I would have read it. it was just always nice to talk to her. The little whimsy that would light up in her eyes.
I mean, I remember Ruth more from when she lived, was it behind the Aurora lift truck in that bookstore I've never been in before? But yeah, I remember, they were nice enough to take Adam in all those years ago, and I can't tell you if I was over there more or he was over at my house back in those days. I can remember when we used to ride bicycles between the two houses, and it was like 25 miles. And we spent a lot of time at that go-kart track. But yeah, and it's hard to talk about Aunt Ruth without Uncle John. Those two were always together. I miss them both. I always felt welcome at their house. I still remember the time, we're there, I think it was Thanksgiving or something, and my brother and I were there, and somebody asked my brother if he wanted beans or peas, and he wanted to know if they had corn. Little things like that still stick out in my head, and I can remember the little house and the little breezeway between the house and the garage, and you come in and there was a table there, and there's always something there with treats in it, cookies or a candy or something. There was always something there. But yeah,
I just want to say, Aunt Ruth and Uncle John changed my life big time, and Aunt Ruth was a huge part of that. Greatest people I ever met, and gonna miss them forever.
Ruth and John were very good to all of us.
Yeah.
And very welcoming and very accepting, and definitely taught us that, open heart is the way you start every conversation. Open, loving, accepting. They had their ground rules, we knew them. We all had our natural respect for them. But they opened our eyes to so many new things. So many just ways to treat people, and ways to act, and ways to love. And, it was little things like pressing flowers with Auntie Ruth, and picking those, or we're going to have a garden and getting, her telling us to go pick the things for the salad, and Amber looking at the lettuce we picked, wondering why we were having weeds for dinner.
I definitely asked her that. I did.
Yes. But she couldn't have done more for, at least the six of us, but everyone she met. We would bring random friends over, we would bring, and everyone, even all the way in Minnesota, would still ask, how's Auntie Ruth? How's Auntie Ruth doing? Because she made such an imprint on their heart with just her spirit. And whether she talked to them a lot or a little, it didn't matter. And she gave the best hug. And I would always tell her, it's time to schedule another trip down because I need another Auntie Ruthie hug. So that'll be forever missed. And all we can do is try to be that for each other. And try to, try to show as much love to the next generation as she showed to all of us.
And many of you know I lived with her for about 8 years, both at the old house in Aurora and after we moved to Bolingbrook. At the time we realized we needed to move out of the old house in Bolingbrook, she considered several options. She considered a retirement home, but those have incredibly long wait lists. So she considered moving to an apartment in the interim, and she asked if I would continue to live with her during her stay in that apartment. And I said, Ruth, I can't think of any apartments in the area that would make you happy. First of all the apartment buildings in the area have stairs, and none of them have space for a garden. That was the big thing, making sure that she had a place to grow her flowers and her vegetables. And she wasn't sold on the idea, but I got my realtor friend to show us a couple houses. And I remember one day we looked at one in the morning, and she was like, nah. We got to another one that afternoon. From the minute she walked in the door, she was like, well, where are we now? I remember we got her down the hall to look at the master bedroom, and the moment she laid eyes on it, she said, mine! She wasn't sold on the idea of living in a house until she saw that house, and it very quickly became home. She was very nervous for a long time because the policy of the landlord was no pets, and we got our realtor to ask if they'd make an exception for her 2 cats. And she, until we had word, she was very nervous and worried that she'd have to give up her 2 cats. And I'll never forget when my friend Jerry came over to the house, the realtor, came over to talk to us about how his negotiations had gone with the landlord. And he was reading down his list of notes, and he said, and they said yes to the cats. Ruth, even in her old age, nearly jumped out of her chair with so much excitement and happiness. She loved her 2 cats. She loved her family. She also loved the many friends that she made in those last years, most of which were people that Sam or I or Ruth Anna brought over to the house. She got along with all of our weird friends very well. She made very good friends with one of our closest friends and now honorary sibling who couldn't be here today, Katie, who she hired to come and clean the house every week. Katie took exceptional care of the house and would always stick around for hours after to talk to Ruth, and they'd exchange stories and have their girl talk time, and she'd sit there and listen to all of Ruth's stories about Germany and life and just sit there and soak them all in. Ruth also, as her health decreased after her amputation, we were able to get a caretaker. You never know who you're gonna get, and we were very blessed that the first person who they sent us was the right person. A nice lady named Debbie, who not only was an excellent caretaker to Ruth, but became a dear, dear friend to her, and considers Ruth to be one of her best friends still. Most of you never got to meet Debbie, but Debbie was the only person that I or my mom or had ever met who was able to motivate Ruth to do her rehab exercises.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't. She could.
Nobody could, but Debbie could.
They'd always send the rehab people to the house, and that only lasts for a few weeks. And they'd say, okay, now keep doing your exercises. And Ruth didn't want to do them. We couldn't make her. But Debbie had a way with Ruth. Get her to exercise. Get her to eat healthier. And the 2 of them would sit for hours over coffee and stare out the big kitchen window at the garden, and they'd watch the hummingbirds, and Ruth would tell her all the names of the different flowers, and Debbie would try to remember them. They'd sit and share many life memories, and they would, it was just a great thing. And Ruth was popular with, like I said, our friends, and even when Sam or I would have our friends over, our 20-something or early 30-something friends would all sit and talk with Ruth. Ruth would sometimes try to go to bed early if she knew they were coming over. She said, I don't know why all these young people would want to hang out with me. They probably want that old person to go to bed already. And we're like, no, they love you. Because she would sit and talk with us, and just out of nowhere she would say something very dry and sarcastic, and everybody would just lose it laughing. And whenever she wasn't at the house and or whenever she went to bed early and our friends came over, they go, where's Aunt Ruth?
Yeah.
They were looking forward to spending that time with her. That was just the range of the impact that she had on people.
I always loved it when one of our friends would act up and she'd just roast them.
She would roast
Especially
them.
Jamal.
Oh, yeah.
She would roast our friends. And if ever we brought over somebody to the house who she didn't like, we'd get nicknames. They'd all have nicknames. We knew if she didn't like somebody if they had a nickname. And usually she was a good judge of character, because we'd say, nah, that person's not like this. Nah, that person. And then we'd find out later, oh, that person did us dirty. Ruth called it. Always. I don't think there's a person who ever met her who won't miss her. And when she'd often talk about what she wanted for her last arrangements, more than I'd like her to. But during the time I lived with her for 8 years, she talked about it a lot. And she just wanted her family to come together and celebrate and share stories. And that's what we're going to do today. This is the area where she wanted her ashes to be spread. And she talked a lot about how she wanted that to go down. And I feel like she'd be very happy with everyone who's here today. I feel like she'd be smiling right now. And she is smiling right now, seeing all of us remembering her.